Hello and welcome to the second half of Chapter 13, Early Members of the Human Line. We are starting on page 353 today. The human fossil record, including not only fossilized bone but stone tools, is not very large. As of 2014, it only represented about 6,000 individuals. This is over the course of millions of years, so not a very large sample size. The more complete we get it, the better our understanding of human evolution. Conversely, it is also harder to connect the dots. So in the early days when there was very few fossils, they were sure that they knew which fossil species led to which. And then as they started finding more species, then they realized that they didn't know exactly which one evolved into which. It was more complex than they originally thought. Another problem we have with the fossil record is what do we call them? There is a lack of agreement as to whether we are naming these creatures at the family level, the subfamily level, the tribe level. And so you will find it, some are listed as hominids, sometimes they're listed as hominins, sometimes they're listed as homininines. I usually refer to them as hominids because it's short and easy to pronounce. These are referring to the various species that have evolved along the human line after the ape-human split. Some researchers now, because of DNA, actually feel it's okay to include the apes, the great apes, in the human line because we are so closely tied DNA-wise. Our genetics are so close. However, that is as controversial as well, and not everyone subscribes to that idea. You don't need to understand the distinctions between whether we use hominin or homininin or hominids. Just realize that there is different terms used that generally are referring to the same thing. Our early ancestors along the human line. As of now, there are 18 recognized species, 18 known species in the human line, and they can be split into three informal subgroups: early members of the human line, Australopiths, and genus Homo. And today we're going to talk about early members as well as the Australopiths. So the earliest members of the human species, the human line, first appeared around the end of the Miocene, or shortly before it ended around 5.3 million years ago. Several new genera and species, all discovered since 1994, are actually dated a little bit earlier to 7 to 8 million years ago, very close to the ape-human split that occurred during that time period. So we are getting closer to knowing and understanding what was going on when the human line split from the ape line. Early members of the human line look very different from later members and from ourselves. Most of the time, researchers include them with the human line rather than with the ape line for two reasons. One is at least some anatomical adaptations that could indicate bipedalism, and the other is a lack of a canine shearing or honing complex, which is the one that you get in the ape line, where there's a gap between the second incisor and the canine on top, and the canine and the first premolar on the bottom for the canines to fit in between, and it's called a shearing complex because they shear or hone each other on each other. That's your honing complex or shearing complex. How close the early members of the human line are to humans is still being questioned as we find more fossils. So the earliest one we're going to talk about is Sahelanthropus chadensis. And all these names are in your book. You will not have to spell them. You just need to know where they are in the book when you find them in tests. So Sahelanthropus chadensis is interesting because it was found farther west than all the other fossils that we're going to talk about. So most of the early hominin fossils are found in East Africa and South Africa. This one was found in Chad, which is why it's chadensis. It's dated about 7 to 6 million years ago, but probably lived at the older end of that spectrum, so right around the time of the ape-human split. So it may actually represent the earliest hominin to split from the ape line. However, the specimens that we have are some mandibular fragments, some teeth, a pretty crushed complete skull, which so we don't know exactly, because it was so crushed if it's been reconstructed correctly or not. But what we have been able to ascertain from that skull is the foramen magnum, the hole, that your spinal cord comes out of, is more anterior than we would expect to find in an ape. Therefore, it indicates that they are at least partially bipedal, getting the head upright as opposed to down position. The next one is Auroran tugenensis. This one was found in Kenya and dates to about 6 to 5.7 million years ago. Again, pretty fragmentary. We have mandibular fragments, some teeth, a few postcrania. The teeth are very similar to apes, but the researchers feel that the femoral pieces that they have found indicate bipedal adaptations. So this is one where if they eventually find more specimens, will either then be, yes, this is for sure a hominin, or no, it's really an ape ancestor. After that, we get Ardipithecus cadaba. Ardipithecus cadaba was found in Ethiopia, dates to about 5.7 to 5.2 million years ago. Again, not a lot of specimens, mandibular fragments, isolated teeth, a few postcranial bones. Originally, this was lumped in with Ardipithecus ramidus, which is one of the next ones we're going to talk about. But further analysis of the teeth indicated that they were more primitive and it still had a canine shearing complex or honing complex. But one toe phalanx, so a toe bone, found is very robust and appears to be from a bipedal organism rather than a quadrupedal organism. But they're not sure even if that toe bone is from cadaba or not, so that's very questionable. The next one we're going to talk about is Ardipithecus ramidus. Its nickname is Ardi. There's a list of features for Ardi on page 354 of your book. This was found in Ethiopia. It dates about 4.4 million years ago, and there's a large number of specimens, which is over 100. So in the fossil realm, over 100 specimens. This is not complete skeletons. This is individual bone pieces, but over 100 specimens is considered a large number. If cadaba, it's most likely a descendant of cadaba because it's found in the same area in a direct timeline with cadaba, and shows a mosaic of derived and primitive features that suggest that it was fully capable of being arboreal, but was also using bipedalism. So in between, it's not completely bipedal yet. It's still using the trees a lot. All of the ones that I've just said, except for Ramidus, have controversy over their taxonomic status because they don't have enough samples to conclusively say that yes, this is a different species from this, or no, it belongs with this. Those are the early ancestors. Then we move into the Australopiths or Australopithecines. These are found in eastern and southern Africa. These are a group that the scientists do agree are on the human line. So for the first group, all but Ramidus are questionable. For this group, we're more secure on where they fit into our evolution. All of them have clear adaptations for bipedalism, but there's still debate on how important the bipedalism was, whether they were arboreal with some varying degrees of bipedalism or predominantly bipedalism but could still use the trees. Some of their cranial features are still, some of them very ape-like, so they're still not going to look like modern humans at all. We have a total of 9 species, 6 that are called non-robust or gracile, which means slender, and 3 that are robust. At least one of the robust species is most certainly the ancestor to the genus Homo, but there's still controversy as exactly which one led to which. We're going to talk about them in the order of their appearance in the timeline. So the oldest is Australopithecus anamensis. This was found in Kenya and Ethiopia. It dates 4.2 to 3.9 million years ago. Its primitive features make it a likely potential link between Ardipithecus ramidus and later Australopithecines. So it seems to be in between the two. It still has a very long forearm and wrist, which are climbing adaptations, but the tibia and ankle show bipedal adaptations. The next is one of the most famous fossils that people, even if they don't know much about anthropology or paleontology, know the name of, and that's Australopithecus afarensis, nicknamed Lucy. Lucy was discovered in 1974 by Don Johanson. It's one of the most complete Australopiths found, so they have about 40% of the skeletal of this entire skeleton has been found on this one. Found in East Africa. Over 300 additional specimens have been found, so they have a more complete picture of what afarensis looked like as opposed to ramidus with only 100 specimens. Dates to 3.9 to 2.9 million years ago and is characterized by ape-like facial proportions, relatively small brain size, long arms, curved fingers for climbing, so you still have that for arboreality, but very clear bipedal adaptations in the pelvis, the leg, and the foot bones. It had flexible locomotor adaptation where it could be both arboreal and bipedal, was very successful because we have this species, afarensis, for over 1 million years, even through changing environmental conditions. Afarensis was highly sexually dimorphic. The males were about 5 feet tall, the females only about 3.5 feet tall. And their diet is thought to be softer plants, leaves, fruits, seeds, roots, and nuts, as well as probably insects and small vertebrates. This one is thought to be ancestral to later Australopithecines and then the genus Homo. On page 355, figure 13.21, you have a picture of our next one, Kenyanthropus platyops. Now this one is controversial enough that they haven't even given it Australopithecine for its genus. They're calling it Kenyanthropus. Discovered in 1999 and dated to 3.5 million years ago. It's considered controversial because there's only one crania, and this one was very fragmented and distorted, so it was hard for them to reassemble. We don't know if it was reassembled correctly or not. It appears to be similar to Australopithecus afarensis, but with a flatter face. Still has a small brain and ear canal similar to the earlier human line. High cheekbones, small molars, and thick enamel similar to early members of the genus Homo. So the people who found it want to say that, yes, it's its own species, its own genus and species, because that makes it, gives them scientific kudos of like, look what we found. However, it's too distorted and there's only the one specimen, so they cannot conclusively say that it is or is not its own species. The next is the earliest human ancestor ever found in terms of timeline. So it was found, the first one was found in 1924, and that was Tongchild was what it was called, found by Raymond Dart in South Africa, dated from 3.3 to 2.1 million years ago. We now call them Australopithecus africanus. So that's 1924 is the start of when we realized that man was really evolving in Africa. First fossil we found that showed human line was evolving in Africa. And it was used to establish that the early human ancestors were evolving in Africa, often referred to as gracile, because the next whiskey quit it. The next one that they found was very robust. So I'll be right back. So the second fossil ever found was a robust Australopithecine. So in comparison, these were very gracile or slender. They appear to have been a little bit smaller than Afarensis. They have less sexual dimorphism, and their more modern features include a more rounded cranium with a slightly larger brain, smaller teeth, and again, very clear bipedal adaptations of the pelvis, femur, and foot. Their more primitive features include relatively long arms, strong prognathism, which again is the face pushing out to fit the teeth in, and climbing adaptations in the hand bones and the shoulder joint. It took almost 40 years for the scientific community as a whole to accept Australopithecines as part of the human line and as the fact that the human line evolved first in Africa. And the reason for this was Piltdown Man. Piltdown Man was discovered in 1911 in a gravel pit in England. So it was a partial cranium and a broken mandible, and they looked like they went together, but they were broken enough you couldn't reassemble it completely. And the gentleman who discovered it wouldn't let anybody look at it close up. He would, show it to you, but don't touch. And so a lot of people, this is in the early 1900s, we're talking an era of a lot of nationalism and very severe racial inequality and racial prejudice against people of color. And this was, oh, look, we evolved in England. Our early ancestors were white. Most of the scientists back then were old white men, let's be honest. And so they had this prejudice, and they preferred the idea that we evolved in England. So we're all going to be white, And so most people, when 13 years later, when Raymond Dart found the Tong child, found Africanus, they were like, that's got to be, look at how pronounced the face is and how small the brain is. That has to be an ape ancestor. We did not evolve in Africa. That's an ape ancestor. And it wasn't until 1950, when the gentleman who discovered Piltdown Man died, that they got access to that specimen and discovered what it really was the cranium of a Bronze Age, I think it was Bronze Age, prehistoric human, modern, anatomically modern prehistoric human, and the jaw of an orangutan that had been strategically broken and the teeth filed down some and colored, aged with special colorants so it looked like a fossil, but it was not. It was a complete hoax. And it slowed the progress of paleontology for that whole time from 1911 till 1950. It just totally, over half the scientists didn't believe that Australopithecus africanus was real, because obviously humans did not evolve in Africa. We evolved in Europe. So the next one that we're going to talk about is Australopithecus garhi. It's dated to around 2.5 million years ago and was found in Ethiopia. The remains include a cranium, some skull fragments, and a partial skeleton. Again, the postcranial remains have long arms, but a longer, obviously bipedal femur. The lack of fossils mean not everyone accepts this as a valid taxon. That means that not everybody thinks that garhi is its own. They think it's probably a variation on Africanus. Even though Africanus is found in South Africa and garhi was found in Ethiopia, which is East Africa, it could just be a regional variation of Africanus. We won't know for sure until we get enough fossils to really tell. What's interesting about garhi, whether it's going to be its own taxon for all time or it's going to be merged back with Africanus, is garhi means surprise in the Afar language, which is the language of the region it was found in. It was found by Tim White, who was a compatriot of Don Johanson. And the reason he named it surprise is because he found stone tools with this fossil. Now, previous to this, it was thought that only genus Homo made stone tools. It was thought originally that only man, man is the tool maker. Only man had the brains to be able to make tools. Um, but Tim White found stone tools and obviously cut and broken animal bones at the site. So we, then know that instead of just genus Homo making tools, our even earlier ancestors were making tools as well. Since then, they have even found tools dating back as far as Afarensis. So it shows, that our ancestors were making tools way before we thought they were. The last one we're going to talk about is Australopithecus sediba. This is the last of the gracile Australopiths. It was found in South Africa, dated to around 1.9 million years ago. This is important because that's very near the time that the earliest of the genus Homo evolved. We have very complete fossils from this area, including several infants, because apparently a family fell to their deaths at this cliff. Some of the features still resemble earlier Australopiths. Some of the details of the teeth, having relatively long arms again, having a small cranial capacity, but they also have a lot of more derived features, including relatively small premolars and molars, a lack of prognathism, so the face is coming in. As the teeth get smaller, the face can become flatter and flatter. The humeral and femoral features indicate a human-like locomotor pattern, and their level of sexual dimorphism is much smaller than we saw like in Afarensis, so they're much closer to the modern human pattern. This combination of primitive and derived traits seems to show a transition between partial arboreality and full-time terrestrial bipedalism. It also shows us through the Australopiths that the changes they occur in a mosaic, and that changes to the pelvis and dentition occurred before we saw changes in limb proportion or cranial capacity. So we still have an arboreal limb proportion where the arms are longer than long as the legs, or longer than the legs, and the cranial capacity is still at about the same level as we see with modern apes, but their pelvis and their dentition are becoming much more what we see of the bipedal pattern. So the people who discovered sediba feel that its ancestor is Africanus, so their timeline is going Afarensis to Africanus to sediba, and that sediba may be ancestral to the genus Homo. Then we have the three robust Australopiths, and these three species are often placed in a separate genus called Paranthropus, and this is because Paranthropus means beside man. It's pretty much recognized by all researchers that these guys are an offshoot, a dead-end offshoot of the human line, that they branched off from the human line at some point in the early in the Australopithecines, and then eventually died out and have no living relatives at this time. There's distinct features in the cranium and teeth that make them different from the gracile Australopiths, including a very wide face, a sagittal crest, that's the one that goes up this way, especially in the males, large flaring zygomatic arches, massive mandible, very thick tooth enamel, molarized premolars and molars, enormous molars, and small peg-like incisors. And there are pictures in your book. Their main dietary adaptations, most of their facial features are dietary adaptations to a very hard diet of nuts, seeds, roots, and tubers, though there is some evidence they also ate fruit, insects, leaves, and meat. And they're highly sexually dimorphic. The males are at least 30% larger than the females. The oldest of these is Australopithecus aethiopicus, found in East Africa, 2.7 to 2.3 million years ago. There's very few remains of this one, but it's felt that it's the ancestor of the other two types of robust Australopiths. Then we have Australopithecus robustus. This is found in South Africa and dated from 1.8 to 1.2 million years ago. So this is the second Australopith that was found. So the first one was Africanus, found by Raymond Dart in 24, and this one was found by Robert Broom in the very not very long after Dart found his. He bought a jaw fragment and molar in South Africa, and he thought maybe it was an Australopithecus africanus, like his friend had found it, something related to Tong baby. But when he got it back to Europe, he discovered it was very different looking. And then he went and looking for more fossils, and he found them. And he's the one who came up with the name Paranthropus, because they look so different than the africanus that he said, he didn't feel that they were going to be on the same line. And then the last one is Australopithecus boisei. Boisei dates 2.3 to 1.2 million years ago. It was found in 1959 in Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania by Mary Leakey. Mary Leakey was married to Louis Leakey, who's very famous in the field of paleontology, and she made discoveries of her own, such as this one. He overlaps with early members of the genus Homo. So her husband nicknamed him Nutcracker Man. And if you look in your book, there should be pictures of how large his face is, how large and flat his face is, and how large his teeth are. His premolars are pretty close to the same size as our molars, and his molars are ridiculously huge. So his evidence of room for very large, strong chewing muscles, extremely large cheek teeth, the thickest dental enamel of any hominid that we know. Recently, they found some postcranial remains that indicate that climbing trees was an important part of their behavioral repertoire. And again, it's pretty much all researchers feel that that's a dead end line. No ancestors alive today. On page 358, you have features that unite the Australopiths that make them different from the genus Homo or from the early human ancestors. So these include anatomy adapted to bipedal locomotion with a high brachial index. That means that their arms are very long in comparison to their legs. They're sexually dimorphic more than humans or the genus Pan, which is chimps, but less than gorillas or orangutans. They were about 1.2 to 1.5 meters tall. Their cranial capacity was about 350 to 600 cc's, which is about what we see in modern apes. Their post-canine dentition was large with very thick enamel. Their incisors and canines are relatively small. There's little sexual dimorphism in the canines. So even though there's a lot of size dimorphism between the males and females, it wasn't necessarily because of fighting other males for access to females, because they don't have a difference in their canine size. So again, the brain size capacity is not much bigger than modern apes. Some of them use tools, not as far as we know, not the robust Australopiths, but the gracile ones did. When we talk about tool use, our genus Homo sapiens is the tool user, because they didn't used to realize that other species could use tools. So they thought, man is the tool user. Only man uses tools. And now we know that chimpanzees make tools, crows and ravens make tools, sea otters make tools. So it's no longer considered exclusive to humans. And so it's not so surprising to find that some of our very early ancestors were also making and using tools. So that's chapter 13, and I will see you guys next week.